Well, that was fast. So if you've ever played against Kassadin as an AP mid laner, chances are you've had some trouble with him. Kassadin is the anti-AP assassin. The reason is thanks to his magic damage reducing passive, magic shield on his Q, and E that charges with spell casts, and high mobility with his ultimate. Every aspect of Kassadin's kit was designed to mess with AP champions, but some have it worse than others. Sustained damage dealers like Karthus, Vladimir, and Cassiopeia tend to have some of the worst problems with Kassadin, not only because their kits get hammered by his resistances, but they rapidly charge his E, which is a vast amount of his damage in trades. Seems like every time you try to trade with a good Kassadin, he manages to not only outduel you, but get away nearly unscathed in comparison. And asking for ganks only seems to be possible until he reaches level 6 and gains his blink. So how exactly are you supposed to deal with the Kassadin being in your lane? There we go. Easy as that. Okay, but really, sadly not all of us have that luxury. Kassadin is popular as a counter pick, so odds are you'll only see him after you've already locked in your champion. Otherwise, you could just play an AD champion and call it a day. But we're going to go ahead and assume you didn't have that option. When we talk about dealing with Kassadin, what we mean is preventing him from being a factor in the game. Kassadin spikes hard in mid-game, so the goal here is to either A. Delay his ability to reach the mid-game, B. Prevent him from doing his job in the mid-game, or C. Punishing him while he's doing his job. That was in order from best case scenario to worst case. He spikes at level 6 when he gets his ability to go ham on an opponent and punish their mistakes in lane. A fed Kassadin is a nuisance in the mid game. If we make sure he doesn't survive his weak early game, we can stop that from happening. So in order to shut down Kassadin early, you've got to know what his weaknesses are and how he trades. 99.99% of the time, a Kassadin enters the lane and tries to cast Q on you when the wave crashes into each other. There are various Kassadin builds where he doesn't do this, but for the most part that's what I've been seeing. Most burst mages like Lux and Twisted Fate can't even trade back with him because they lack the damage against that shield, so it looks like you can't punish him for it. However, with the recent change to minion aggro, now his Q will cause minions to attack him. This means all you have to do to outtrade his early game poke is back up, either forcing him to stop pressuring you, or forcing him to take a lot of minion aggro. If he still chooses to cast Q, just follow up with a few auto attacks and a spell. That's the easiest way to weed out the good Kassadin players from the bad ones. If you're a DPS mage, now is actually a really good opportunity for you. Say Kassadin is being Kassadin and walks up to trade early. If he crosses this invisible line of being overextended, a champion like Karthus or Cassiopeia can dish out a disgusting amount of punishment early just for trying to poke. It could even lead to a kill or burn summoners. So keep in mind, Kassadin is particularly weak in the early game, especially for being an assassin. His tendency to poke during the laning phase, thanks to Corrupting Potion, can quickly prove to be his downfall if you play it well. If you aren't successfully pressuring him levels 1 through 5, you're probably doing something wrong, or you're just being outclassed by the enemy. As a Karthus main, there's a strategy I'm particularly fond of, one which will work well for most DPS mages too. Let's take a look at another one of my Karthus main friends. This is GBay99. No, it's not the NA pleb you guys know. This is an OCE Challenger Karthus main, who just so happens to be the number 2 Karthus in the world right now according to LulzSkill. He's an active member in the Karthus Mains community, so I'm able to reach out to him a lot. He sent me this clip to discuss punishing enemies early. You should take a look to see how he plays the early game against this Victor. So as you can see, he's abusing one of the strongest runes in the early game, Presence of Mind, to deliver unholy amounts of damage with no cost to mana. The strategy that he uses constantly is to use your early level up to run down the opponent into a choke point in order to burn a summoner spell like Flash. In this case, he gets barrier and backs off. This strat is something Karthus has been abusing since the rune itself first came along, and it's so strong it might still see use when Precision Secondary gets nerfed with the attack speed. So what does this have to do with Kassadin? The thing about this strat is that it's so consistent for all matchups, there's hardly anyone who can avoid it. Kassadin is no exception. So while he's weak early, out-trading him during his poke and abusing the strategy to force some action is highly effective. Be careful though, it's more suitable for people who are used to playing DPS champions early. Cassiopeia can use the same strategy to force an opponent out of lane by level 2. But let's say something happens, and Kassadin is now a bigger problem than ever. Either you ruined your early game or you got poked out. Now Kassadin is level 6 and might even have an item advantage. If Kassadin buys MR early like an Abyssal Mask, it might seem like there's not a whole lot you can do. So how do we deal with that? First off, you should be warding. Ward everywhere. Some of the best control ward spots for preventing roams are in the river bush if you're blue side, and the red buff bush here when you're red side. If you want to be fancy about it, put a stealth ward in the middle of the lane so you can see wherever Kassadin walks off to. If you aren't warding and if you aren't pinging MIA, and your bot lane gets ganked, I'm sorry, but it's your own fault, because you see communication is what wins games. If you don't even know what a control ward is, now's the time to learn. A lot of AP mages, especially DPS mages, find that the strong suit is punishing the enemy's mistakes. If you find a Kassadin in low elo, he's probably going to be making a bunch. Even in high elo, he can definitely be abused. You see, Kassadin's full rotation takes about 2 seconds. A bit faster if they're more experienced. Then all of his abilities are on cooldown for a maximum of 9 seconds. That means if he doesn't outright delete you with his trade, you've got a pretty good window to counterattack. If you have any MR or a decent sized health pool, Kassadin shouldn't be able to bring you below half health with one rotation. Usually it takes a bit of poke beforehand or another rotation afterwards. But if you didn't build any health or any MR, and you rush full damage instead, I'm sorry for your loss. So assuming Kassadin isn't stupidly fed, if he extends past this invisible line and overextends, suddenly DPS champions lose their disadvantage. It's at this exact point when they can turn the lane around. His ult should be on cooldown for another 6 seconds. That's 6 seconds of free damage. At this point, the only thing you need to be worried about is the enemy jungler being close by. Even if you don't get a kill, you should have been able to make the most of it and earned a free lane for a bit. From there you can either shove in and back, or maybe even go for a roam. Finally, we hit the mid game. Everyone is at their strongest, because there's no late game meta anymore, and Kassadin is looking to make plays on the map. So maybe you did well in the early game and you can push your lane without getting pressured. Maybe you fed and can't leave your tower without getting 100-0'd and your team starting to flame you.
An ally has been slain.
Don't panic, just do your job and defend the tower, picking up whatever CS you can and playing safe. But the second, and I mean the very second Kassadin leaves lane, please ping MIA and make sure that they know he's coming, and shove that wave in as hard as you can. The thing with Kassadin is that his wave clear is non-existent. As the mid laner, you can shove in your lane and prevent him from getting a lot of CS, and it opens you up for making more plays around the map. The goal here is to make his roams less worthwhile. The same thing goes for any assassin, but Kassadin is just a little scary, so I get you might be reluctant to get bodied by a Kassadin hiding inside of a bush. But you have to shove in and put some damage on the tower. If you think you're putting yourself in harm's way, that's fine, just clear the wave and back off. But look for opportunity elsewhere. If Kassadin is going bot, spam ping them and roam top. If you're confident enough, you can even try to follow Kassadin down. But the importance of pushing your wave in cannot be overstated. We have to make sure Kassadin loses something for this. If you're doing poorly, try to influence other lanes. Champions with global ultimates like Karthus and Twisted Fate can do this without losing much, but with other champions you have to learn how to roam whenever you're behind. It takes practice and a little bit of patience, but it does pay off. Sometimes you have no choice but to leave your lane because you can't possibly defend it on your own anymore.
An ally.
Look for all the opportunities you can get. Alright, so finally we're in the late game. You've done well to get this far without your team spamming /FF every 5 minutes. Maybe you did well early, you took the mid tower when Kassadin roamed, and maybe you made a few good roams yourself. Maybe you got absolutely bodied and you used the legendary /full mute all strategy to remain tilt proof. Good job, you're almost there. Now everyone is starting to group as 5. Kassadin is notorious for being the cleanup crew of late game. Once the fight is almost over, he comes in and gets a pentakill. When he's especially fed, he might even function as the engage to pounce on an unsuspecting carry. So how do we deal with this when we've grouped as 5? If Kassadin is fed, be careful of your flanks and make sure you've got a good amount of wards in the jungle. If you've got eyes on him trying something funny, Kassadin won't last long against 5 people, especially if there's any kind of CC involved. Keep an eye on his mana bar. If he uses his ult a few times to either engage or escape, he might not be able to keep up with his ultimate's ridiculous mana cost and should be easy to trap and kill. I'm not going to ask the impossible and hope you have a competent team, but as an assassin, Kassadin should be the priority for your frontline to lock down so you can kill him. If you don't have a frontline, I guess you're just out of luck whenever he does decide to go in, but if you have any kind of peel, try to get him off your 80 carry so they can deal damage to him by ignoring his passive. If you're good enough at watching your flanks and your frontline has enough CC to stop his engage, Kassadin isn't so fearsome an opponent in the late game if he's not insanely fed. Literally the best way to prevent a Kassadin from functioning in the late game is to just ward. Everything your team can do to maintain vision will help you out. Alright, that's just about everything I have against Kassadin. The stuff I've presented here comes from the Kassadin Mains subreddit, the Karthus Mains Discord, and personal experience. If you have a way of dealing with Kassadin, I'd love to hear it. My LP depends on it. You should tell me about it in the comments section. Alright, I'm done. Enjoy your Philo.